Okay, welcome back. Let's talk about cell transport. If you remember our conversation, we said that a cell has an outer membrane known as the plasma membrane. The function of the plasma membrane is to regulate what moves in and out of the cell. The plasma membrane makes sure that certain things cannot go in and certain things can go in. This makes the plasma membrane selectively permeable, which means some substances can pass freely, some transported, and some prohibited. There are two ways. Let's change this to two. Your book says three, but for the purpose of this class, I'm going to do two ways. There are two ways in which substances can move into and out of a cell. We have passive transport and we have active transport. Passive transport is when substances move from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration without the need for energy. So if you imagine there are lots of particles outside the cell, lots of particles, and they need to move. Naturally, these particles will move into the cell because of the amount you have on the outside, just to balance everything. This is called passive transport. If I came into class wearing a lot of cologne, before too long, the rest of the classroom would be smelling of cologne because the smell has moved from a region of high concentration, which is my body, to a region of lower concentration, which is the rest of the classroom. And it requires absolutely no ATP, no energy. Then we have active transport. Active transport is the opposite of this. When you're trying to transport a substance from a region of low concentration, which is outside, to a region of high concentration, which is inside. This happens sometimes in case of when we're trying to transport glucose into the cell, because the cell needs glucose and needs all the glucose. So we're moving glucose from a region of lower concentration to a place where we've already put in a lot of glucose. This is called active transport. It requires ATP and it moves from lower to higher concentration. So these are the details of passive transport. Like I mentioned earlier, no energy required. Molecules move down their concentration gradients. Cells do not expend energy. And there are certain times when molecules simply slip between the phospholipids, the layers of the plasma membrane. A certain unique type of passive transport is called facilitated diffusion. And facilitated diffusion is when you use transport proteins to move a molecule. So this is a condition where the molecules are not able to slip between the phospholipids, but they're able to use transport proteins embedded into the phospholipid bilayer. For instance, water uses a protein called aquaporins to transport itself into the cell, in and out of the cell. And why is this? The plasma membrane is a phospholipid bilayer. It's got two layers of lipids. And if you remember, water and oils do not mix. And so to get water into this layer, you have a protein called an aquaporin that allows water to get in and out. This is called facilitated diffusion. Okay? Here we see a simple example of a simple example of diffusion. This is what we call simple diffusion. Diffusion is simply the movement of molecules from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. So if you have a crystal dye, the crystal dye has a concentration of dye, a high concentration of dye. When you put it in water, before too long, the molecules of the crystal dye will begin to penetrate the water. As you can see in these, and before too long, the molecules move through the entirety of the water. This is called simple diffusion, a movement from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. And you can see the progression here. This is called simple diffusion. And this is facilitated diffusion. And here's your solute. Your solute is so much bigger and it could not slip into the phospholipids. So it uses a carrier protein to be able to get through the phospholipid bilayer, and you can see that here. This is called facilitated diffusion. So we're still moving along concentration gradient, yet we're using the help of a carrier protein or channel. Okay? All right, there is another type of diffusion called osmosis. Osmosis is the movement of water. In our cells, water is constantly moving in and out of our cells. So in this case, water is moving. So please remember, osmosis is not movement of any molecules. It's specifically movement of water from a region of high water concentration to a region of low water concentration. For instance, if you have a situation like this tube has been put into a beaker containing water. In the tube, you have so much more of the solute, which is the substance that dissolves in water. And here we have a lot of the water. Before long, the water will move into the solute, into the tube, because there is so much more concentration of solute in the tube and less concentration of solute outside the tube, and the water is much more concentrated in the beaker than in the tube. So the water moves into the tube, and you can see that here by a change in the quantity of the solute and water in the tube, or quantity of the solute and the water in the tube. Okay, so this is called osmosis. Movement of water is osmosis. And sometimes water moves because it's easier for water to move than for a solute to move. There are certain solutes that are much bigger than the water particles, or they're prohibited from moving. So it's much easier for water to